Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to the Adam Thompson Show.
Cutting edge.
He just told you to shut the f*** up.
No holds barred.
Thanks for not calling me a liar, son of a...
The latest trending topics, legal cases, and social issues. In-your-face commentary on all subjects. Adam Thompson.
You can't handle the truth.
Adam Thompson brings his 25-year experience as a high-profile criminal and civil trial lawyer and gritty New York street smarts and attitude to the studio.
Real unbiased talk.
Those who want respect, give respect.
You never know what he'll say next. This is the Adam Thompson Show. Here's your host, Adam Thompson.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Adam Thompson Show. Thank you for joining us, all our listeners across the country on our 25 AM stations and affiliates around the whole United States, listening through Starcom Radio, KKRP, all our listeners on Blog Talk Radio, and all the other affiliates. First of all, thanks for joining us. As you know, we're going to be converting also soon to our TV edition of this, where you'll be able to view through our affiliates as well as online in our YouTube channel. So please start posting your comments on topics and guests you want to see and hear about. We're very excited. That'll be coming soon, including our special edition from Comic-Con in Louisville. We talked to a lot of exciting people there. But tonight's show is going to be fascinating. There's so much going on in the world right now, but nothing more compelling what's going on presently in North Korea. I mean, there was just something in the news today that's just as mind-blowing, that one of the potential leaders in North Korea, and again, you never know when you read these articles what's true or not true when it comes to articles coming out of North Korea, but supposedly one of the leaders of North Korea was executed at the direction of the government leaders via flamethrower, okay? That's correct, via flamethrower. Now, there's been a lot of other articles that have come out about horrific events that have happened in North Korea, so you really have to shift through what's true or what's fiction. I mean, there was a story that came out that dogs ravaged children in the street and ate them that turned out to be false, and other stories like that. But there's many that are true, with the military killing children and killing opposition leaders and people that question the government in any way, shape, or form. But this is another just one of those incredible stories that someone was actually executed via flamethrower. If it's true, it just really speaks on the horrific type of incidents that take place in North Korea. And with that said, we're going to examine what North Korea is all about tonight. We have a renowned expert on this topic who speaks and teaches nationwide. His name is Hamisevicz. He's going to be on and tell us really what goes on behind the curtain in North Korea. Tell us about the country, the leaders, the culture, and about all these different stories we hear about and whether or not they're a real threat to the United States, our allies, and the rest of the world. And then we're going to try to lighten it up in the second half of the hour, and I'm very excited to have on from one of my favorite shows of all time, The Sopranos, the incredible character Vito, played by none other than Joe Ganascoli, who's another Brooklynite like me, so it's going to be great to have a Brooklyn guy in the house to talk about his role on The Sopranos and other projects that he's working on. So with no further ado, let's get right to it and explore and examine North Korea. My next guest on the Adam Thompson Show is an expert on North Korea and Korea in general. So we have a million questions we're going to ask because we get so many emails on a regular basis about what's going on in that country, its culture, and the relationship that they have with the United States and our allies. So without further ado, let me bring on someone who is the Director of Research and Academic Affairs at the Korea Institute of America, actually the Korea Economic Institute of America, known as KEI. He's responsible for many issues affecting the U.S. South Korea alliance, especially related to how it impacts with North Korea. Without further ado, let me bring on the show Nicholas Hamisevicz.
Hey, Adam. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on. I really appreciate your time. I know how busy you are. And let's start right out of the box, you know, with what the public sees and what the public doesn't know that's going on really behind the scenes.
Sure.
Everybody's quite obvious that there's issues with North Korea, our relationship with North Korea. It seems through several different presidential campaigns and elections, no matter who's in office, whether it's a Republican or Democrat, we can't seem to get any good ties going with North Korea. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think there's two main factors. One is the security side of things. North Korea is a huge security threat, both to the United States and our allies, especially South Korea and Japan. So there's a big security factor. The security factors are, one, it's working and has nuclear weapons. So that is a big concern for the United States and how North Korea would actually go about using a nuclear weapon. The other thing it does is it has a lot of missiles and artillery, and we see that happening right now as they're testing all these missiles and artillery in the East Sea of Japan area. So those are more of the threat to our allies, South Korea and Japan. And then the second aspect of that is the human rights aspect of North Korea, where they just have a huge atrocity and a huge just punishment of their people, which really is difficult for the United States to handle because North Korea is so closed and so isolated that we cannot, it's very difficult for us and others to help out North Korea on the human rights side of things as well.
Well, we're going to talk about the human rights side of stuff a little bit in the second half of this interview. Let's first talk about the military interest. Now, there's been problems between U.S. and North Korea relations for a long time. My big question is, with this knowledge out there and knowing that the difficulties it was to get relations going, moving forward, trying to come to some agreeable understanding between nations, while it was, I believe, on the watch of Clinton, they were able to acquire nuclear capabilities. Now, knowing how unstable this country's government is and the potential for future problems, what really went on that we allowed them to secure the nuclear weapons rather than stepping in before it got to that point and preventing it? Because obviously we see what's looming now in Iran, and people had to be thinking the same thing. We said we would never let North Korea get nuclear capabilities, and we'll step in at the last minute and make sure they don't, but it happened. What prevents the same thing now happening in Iran? So how did it happen in North Korea, and what's the likelihood we could see the same kind of events occur in Iran?
Sure. I mean, North Korea has been working on trying to develop nuclear weapons for a long time. So they probably started in the late 1960s, early 1970s, really trying to figure out how to develop nuclear weapons. And they were really trying to do it because they were afraid of the United States and South Korea attacking them and basically taking them over and trying to reunify the peninsula. So the United States has tried, as you said, under the Clinton administration and under pretty much every administration, we've tried to convince North Korea that having nuclear weapons is not the best option for them. They don't need them. They need to do lots of other things with their people. But what North Korea has been able to do has been a couple of things. One, they've been able to avoid the sanctions we've put on them, whether it's the United States itself or the United Nations and international community. They do that by counterfeiting money, by doing a lot of illicit activities, and then they also do that by getting help from other countries that don't really follow the sanctions laws to the T. And countries like China have been pretty loose on their definitions of the sanctions regimes, and other countries just don't have the money, time, and people to really concentrate on following through on these sanctions. So North Korea is able to gain some technology, gain some money, and on their own develop nuclear weapons. And we've tried to get them to stop. We've tried aid. We've tried to get freezes in there, which was kind of what the Clinton administration was doing with the agreed framework agreement, but it has not worked. North Korea has, throughout this time, continued to develop the nuclear weapons, and that was part of the problem. At the end of the Clinton administration and into the Bush administration, the United States saw North Korea continuing to build nuclear weapons, even though we had an agreement and we asked them not to do these things. So North Korea...
What prevents the U.S., knowing that there was agreement in place to prevent them from developing nuclear capabilities, why, when we saw they were not listening and sanctions were ineffective in other countries that really don't have our allies' interests at best heart, why didn't we just step in at that point and say you crossed the line in the sand and militarily just take out the plants that they had that were building nuclear capabilities? Sure.
I mean, part of that issue, a big part of that issue is the concern that North Korea would attack South Korea if we did that. And Seoul is the number one target for North Korea, and that is the main city and the biggest city in South Korea. It's the biggest financial city in South Korea. And so with our ally being held hostage, really, from North Korea's artillery, the concern is that if we went in militarily to one specific spot just to take out the nuclear plant, or what we thought were nuclear, where they were hiding nuclear material, the next response would be missiles on Seoul. And so that calculation is part of that calculation. The other part is we're not really sure where North Korea is hiding all of its nuclear material and nuclear weapons. And so we know that they have one plant, Yongbyon, which a lot of people hear about in the news, but there is pretty much a consensus that North Korea is hiding nuclear material and nuclear expertise elsewhere in the country. And we don't know where that is. And unfortunately, we probably don't know where that is.
Well, that's obviously a problem, and better intelligence or military capabilities to figure that out would help in such an operation. But as you said at the beginning of this interview, that there's such horrific crimes against humanity going on there and oppression of civil rights and so on, you would think if there was military intervention by the U.S. that the population would have to welcome such activity, because hopefully it would liberate their country and give them freedom, which now they have none of at all.
Hopefully, but you have to realize that North Korea has done such a great job with its propaganda that many of the people in North Korea don't know that the United States is trying to help them. They think that the United States is holding them back, that the United States has put these sanctions on them and it is crushing their country. So they don't blame their government for their problems. They blame the United States because of the North Korean government propaganda. So we would hope that once unification started to happen or the government collapsed, that the North Korean people would realize that the United States and South Korea are trying to help them. But the propaganda has been so heavy that is more of a difficult transition for us to convince them to do than just coming in there as a liberating force.
Well, people that really follow the news here in the United States know how our mass media is controlled, and we've filtered what information we get. And if you really want to get different viewpoints, you have to go to the internet or alternative news measures and so forth. So I could imagine how the airwaves are completely controlled and dominated by only what the government wants you to hear in North Korea, which can lead to the entire populace being totally propagandized to led into believing something that's completely fictional and not true, which takes me over to Iran. If that is the case in North Korea, they say history repeats itself, learn from history. We saw what happened in North Korea and where we are with them now and the threat they pose to the world. So knowing that the same thing's going on in Iran, that from early age, kids are told America's the evil empire, we do horrific things around the world, and the whole culture believes that, you have to change the ideas and the mindset of a culture to really, bring about the change. But as long as they all think that way there, knowing that they're going to go around the sanctions that we impose on them, how do we not prevent seeing Iran with nuclear capabilities in the next few years?
Well, I think this leads back to your question of why we haven't done it with North Korea. I think that there's been, in some ways, an emphasis on trying to prevent Iran from getting to where North Korea is now. And so you have more sanctions on Iran than you do on North Korea, based on the U.S. Congress. You have a bigger effort, especially from Secretary Kerry, in the Middle East to try and solve some of these problems and try to make sure that Iran doesn't get to the point where North Korea is with its nuclear weapons. And so if you're taking your focus away from North Korea and trying to put it on Iran, then that's a factor of how North Korea is where it is and why Iran is where it is. And so you're right. We're trying to prevent Iran from getting there, and I think that is part of the process that has allowed North Korea to kind of continue along its way. They're both very difficult issues and both really important issues to deal with. And so that's why we need good leadership and good approaches to both of these countries.
Now, understanding a lot about North Korea and the government there is understanding their leader, Jong-un. And this is definitely a very interesting and diverse character, and trying to get a grasp on his personality, his way of thinking, has been very hard to do, it seems, for foreign leaders, including our country. We think one thing will make him react one way, we do another thing thinking he'll react another way, and then you pick up the newspaper and you see him watching a basketball exhibition with Dennis Rodman. So let me ask you, tell us a little bit about this leader, how he really thinks as far as the best you can, and what are the real concerns we should have about him and how he's running his country?
Sure. Kim Jong-un is the new leader in North Korea. He is the son of Kim Jong-il, and Kim Jong-il is the son of Kim Il-sung. Kim Il-sung is basically the founder and first president and leader of North Korea. So Kim Jong-un is the grandson of the founder, and he's probably about 30, maybe 31 years old, but I think he's probably 30 years old. And you're right, we don't know much about him. He hasn't met any foreign leader. He hasn't met a leader, Xi Jinping from China, and the Mongolian president even went to North Korea and didn't get a meeting with Kim Jong-un. So he hasn't met with any foreign leader.
Except Dennis Rodman in a basketball tournament.
Except Dennis Rodman, and that is part of what you said. It is very tricky to get a handle of him because you have the perfect example of this with Dennis Rodman coming to North Korea and Eric Schmidt, the executive chairman of Google, coming to North Korea. You have the executive chairman of Google who worked with President Obama on his campaign, who is in charge of this multi-billion-dollar company, and he can't get a meeting with Kim Jong-un, and you see pictures of him walking around in a winter coat looking at computer screens with military cadets, pretending to surf the internet. And Dennis Rodman gets dinners and drinks and basketball with Kim Jong-un. So it is very hard.
2 times.
Exactly.
Not just once.
Exactly. He got invited back. So it is very hard to tell what Kim Jong-un is trying to do on a leadership level. And I think the main thing he's got to do is, as a leader, is secure his power base and make sure that he is seen as in control. And so I think that's why you see a lot of these purges lately with his uncle. He killed his uncle, Jong Sung-taek. And why you see we've had at least 3 different ministers in charge of the Ministry of Defense in North Korea. So he's constantly moving people around, 1, to make sure that people are loyal to him, and 2, to move up people that he feels comfortable with, rather than people his father put in to either help him or help with the transition. So Kim Jong-un right now is trying to figure out how to run the country, and that is the biggest concern. The biggest concern is we don't know if he knows how to run the country. We don't know exactly what he wants to do with the United States and with South Korea. And so when you have these military exercises are going on, and you have the news where North Korea shelled artillery shells into the South Korean portion of the West Sea, and South Korea shelled portions into North Korean territory in the sea, there's a big danger of one of those shells hitting someone or hitting a military operation or a military equipment, and you have an escalation. And so that is the concern we have with Kim Jong-un. We just don't know what he's thinking and how he will react to major crises.
Well, his actions of shifting around people, even killing family members to secure his power and make sure that there's no loyalty issues, show some instability in his way and behavior. And knowing that you have that person at the trigger finger of a military operation, including nukes, has to be alarming to every world leader, particularly the people that are not in any kind of alliance with him. So with that as the starting point, that we have this person in charge of that, what really is their true capability? And it's a 2-part question. We know they have nukes now. How do their nukes compare in power and significance to our nukes? Are they even as powerful as the ones we used back in World War II? Or are they, less powerful than that? So that would be question 1. And question 2 is, do they really have the ability to deliver those nukes? Meaning, do they have ballistic missiles that can go? How far can they reach the U.S. or our allies in Europe? And could they just put them on an airplane that would be capable of flying and dropping them? So, how good are the nukes, and what about the delivery systems?
Sure. I mean, the nukes, it's hard to tell, but they've done a couple tests, and based on those tests and based on what people have seen as far as some of the centrifuges that people have seen in North Korea. They think that they are, capable of having that they have nuclear weapons. They're probably not as large and as powerful as we have right now, but they probably are very, very capable and dangerous of exploding things. So they might be a little less than what we did in World War II, or they might be around that area. I'm not quite sure on that.
Okay,
but
that's significant. But it is significant.
No, it's definitely
It isn't
significant.
what we hear about, like a terrorist attack with a dirty bomb or dirty nukes or things like that. It's to that level, but maybe not as big. But it is something serious then.
Well, I think there's two different things. You can either put it as a dirty bomb, which would be probably a lower in yield, just so you can hide it and transfer it in that kind of dirty bomb way, or you have it in a higher yield, which they can do and put it on a warhead and attack South Korea, Japan, or the United States. So more and more, we think that North Korea is getting the capability of hitting the mainland of the United States. And so you had General Charles Jacob, he's the head of NORAD. He testified in front of the House Representatives Armed Service Committee earlier this year. And he said that basically for him and for the U.S. military, that this ballistic threat to the United States mainland has basically gone into practical consideration, so that they are really thinking about North Korea having that capability rather than just in theory having that capability. And that is a huge concern. And you had Secretary Robert Gates, when he was Secretary of Defense, a couple years ago saying North Korea can do it in 5 years. So North Korea has continued to develop these technologies, both missile and then putting a nuclear warhead on top of that missile to reach the United States and the mainland of the United States. That's their goal, no doubt about it, and they're getting closer and closer every day.
And that's obviously the big concern of American people and our allies in our country.
Yes, it changes the dynamics. It changes the dynamics drastically if North Korea can hit the mainland of the United States.
Well, certainly you have to be concerned that if the person's unstable in charge of that country, and he clearly seems to be, that if you're negotiating with him and there's a breakdown in negotiations, you don't know how far he'll escalate it and how fast, just based on being irrational. Is that a fair statement?
Exactly, and we've had breakdowns over simple things so far. You've had the February 29th deal, where basically we, the United States, offered North Korea food aid to North Korea, and in exchange for them freezing their missile and nuclear capabilities. And then 2 months later, they tested a satellite, violating the agreement in terms for the United States. So you had a breakdown in a simple agreement. We had basically an agreement where Ambassador Robert King, our U.S. envoy for North Korean human rights, to go to North Korea and get Kenneth Bae, the Christian missionary who's imprisoned there. And that was the deal. Ambassador King was basically on the plane going to Asia to go get Kenneth Bae, and the North Koreans backed out of that agreement. So even on the simple agreements, we have trouble with North Korea, let alone dealing on something, a bigger issue with North Korea and with Kim Jong. And this is all under Kim Jong-un's leadership. All these two agreements were under Kim Jong-un's leadership that we had difficulty completing. So you're right, coming up with a bigger agreement, dealing with a much bigger issue or a crisis issue will be very difficult and very uncertain on how Kim Jong-un and North Korea will handle those situations.
Now, what do you think the U.S. can do to best contain or control this situation from getting any worse than it is, and even try to improve relations? What do you think the best mode of approaching this would be?
The first thing to do is what we're doing is trying to make sure that we are rock solid with South Korea, and as far as how we're going to handle provocations from North Korea, and how we're going to try to approach North Korea on its nuclear weapon issue. That's the first thing. The second thing is to also bring in Japan. Have both of our allies with us as far as deterrence and making sure that North Korea understands that if they do something dangerous and with a provocation similar to what they've done previously, that they're going to regret it. And that is the main thing. The next thing I would do is constantly remind North Korea that we will offer them aid and we will be willing to talk to them if they respond positively to those type of agreements and those type of arrangements. North Korea constantly diverts the aid that is given to them by the United States or by other countries to their military and to the elite. That cannot happen. We need, if they give the aid to the right people, the United States will give aid. No problem. We can do that. And so those are the type of conversations we need to have. The last thing I would do is back to our conversation about the propaganda. I would promote pushing radio and other technologies into North Korea. So you're trying to pump in radio broadcasts from Radio Free Asia, Voice of America, and these other North Korean defector radio stations that are in South Korea. Give them money so that they can pump their broadcasts into North Korea. So the North Korean people will understand that the United States and South Korea are trying to help them, not hurt them. That the United States and South Korea government are trying to help them, and it's North Korean government that is punishing them.
Let me ask a question that sounds simplistic, but lots of people ask about this and wonder. Here we go to the computer, and it's like, I read something in the New York Times. I don't believe it. I'm going to go research it. We go to the Internet. We start looking up news sources from England or Israel. There's, the Jerusalem Times. I'll go to the BBC. I'll look at different perspectives and get different views and thoughts on a particular issue or topic. Can people in North Korea just go to the Internet and access outside agencies to look stuff up? And do they even have capabilities to Internet access as a regular citizen?
As a regular citizen, no. You probably don't even have access to a computer if you're a regular citizen outside of Pyongyang and some of the larger cities. You probably don't have access to a computer. You probably don't have any power at night, so you can't even run your TV that you have, let alone access to the Internet. So Internet access in North Korea is very low outside of Pyongyang. In Pyongyang, yeah.
Now,
where there's elites, they have it.
I wanted to ask that specifically because people living here think the rest of the world is like us, and it isn't. They live in much different conditions, and that's where I want to head to in the next set of questions about the human rights violations that are going over in North Korea to really paint the clear picture. But just in getting information, because information is power, and the more you have knowledge and you ask questions and get the answers that you're looking for, it opens people's minds, and that's how we get in a lot of these countries revolts for freedom and people realizing that they're living, in conditions that they shouldn't. But if they're kept in the dark or they're told, their entire lives that the enemy isn't us, but it's someone else, and it's this country called America or the allies that work with America, that brainwashing will never end. It'll just keep getting passed down generation to generation, and that's the culture. So until, as you said, we can get some improved technology in there that the people have access to, that they could learn what outside thoughts are and what's really going on, we may not see changes or revolts from the people because they don't know better. So with that said, tell us really what it's like living in North Korea if you're a typical citizen, and please segue into the human rights violations that are going on there and touch on, there's concentration camps from what I understand and what I've read and researched, and just the crimes against humanity are just horrific there, from starvations, famines, and so on. Please speak on this.
Sure. Now, I went to North Korea in August 2011, and when you're traveling outside of Pyongyang, you can definitely see the differences. So for regular North Koreans, they have little access to power and electricity, like we talked about. They have little access to cars and other motorized vehicles that can get them around town or that they're able to use on their farm or use in their city. So it is very poor there. They have little access and little ability to move around the country. And so for an average North Korean, you are trying to survive day to day with yourself and with your family. You're trying to survive. And that is, that's a tragedy. And the tragedy is that just the people that are trying to survive are there. And then and on top of that, you have the human rights situation like you talked about. So you have lots of prison camps in North Korea where they put people in these prisons for anything from thinking that they had access to a South Korean DVD or flash drive, USB port, to even putting people in jail because a family member was arrested for corruption or was arrested for violating terms of work or any other reason that they decide to put someone in jail. They put other family members in jail as well. And so it is a huge, huge problem. And the recent UN Commission of Inquiry on North Korean human rights has really done a great job of collating a lot of information that we had, as well as supplying some new information about all of these human rights atrocities across the board, prison camps, not allowing people to practice their religion freely, persecution of people, different classification of people. So, you put people in different classes so that they can't move and they can't have access to good jobs in the country. It is a very difficult situation and a very tragic situation in North Korea for average North Koreans.
When you live in North Korea, wherever it is, basically whatever little town or village or city you're born in, you're basically going to be there your whole life because your means of transportation and getting even to close by cities, unless you're walking or have some other mode of transportation, it's really like living centuries ago where you're without power, no electricity. I imagine that your access to food regularly and even drinkable water or any kind of medication is severely limited at best. Is that a fair statement?
Exactly. And you're not even allowed to move. Even if you wanted to walk to the next city, you're technically not allowed to. You technically need permission to move from city to city by the government and by government officials. And so you're in your own town. You have there's a neighborhood watch that basically watches everybody to make sure everyone's following the right orders from the government in your own town. You have the police force that's spying on you. You have other security agencies that are spying on you at work or the place where you go where you're supposed to work, but it can't work because there's no power in that factory. So it is a very difficult situation. And, yes, it is very difficult to move from the place where you were born.
Well, here we always worry about, will martial law be declared if the dollar collapses? Here, all kind of a conspiracy theory kind of approaches to stuff and concerns. But there, the people are living under military rule on a day-to-day basis, that they can't go travel freely. They have to get permission for everything. And, again, going back to the civil rights violations we're talking about, if they were to question it or challenge the government or the police force or military force that's there, that alone will get them taken from the horrible conditions they have even into worse conditions where they'll put them in a camp and basically be under starvation conditions.
Exactly. And that is what the UN Commission has talked about, those starvation conditions, the prisoners eating rats and eating bits of corn that are on the ground or that have come out of waste, and they're picking through human waste to try and get food. They're awful, awful conditions. And so that UN report, there's other great books out there, Escape from Camp 14, Nothing to Envy, and Aquariums of Pyongyang, 3 great books that talk about all these issues and talk about prison camps as well, that I encourage people to read, because those really put an insight onto those damp and dark conditions that prisoners are in, and the desire, the destitute that they have, and the lack of food and clothing and capabilities in those prison camps.
Now, do you ever think we'll see the people uprise against the leadership and the government in North Korea like we've seen happen in Egypt and in Syria, and Libya, around the world, and they threw the government out and then they try to liberate themselves or put in their own government? Or do you think that people living there are so brainwashed that they think how they live and what they're told and what they do each day is normal, and that's what real life is, and they have no idea? What do you really think?
Yeah, Adam, as sad as it is to say, I think it will be very difficult for the people to rise up against the current government in North Korea. One is the propaganda that we talked about. The other is the security mechanisms they have in North Korea. They have all these different security organizations that spy on the people and that spy on each other in order to prevent an uprising. They do not want an uprising. Their worst nightmare is a Libya situation. North Korea is doing everything to avoid that. So that's listening to cell phone conversations, even though there's not that many. That's preventing people from having access to the internet. That is preventing people from moving across the country to organize or even to move to different locations across the country. The North Korean leadership and government is trying everything possible to avoid a Libya situation.
Now, when the populace is so brainwashed and so controlled and basically living in fear, when you think you step out of line even a little, that not only will you be punished, but your family or even friends of the family will be taken into camps and brutalized or made to starve or whatever the horrific conditions are, it really makes you step back. The fear factor is so huge. How do you get an uprising to really start under those circumstances?
It's difficult. I mean, what you're going to need to do is have that information getting into North Korea. So with the radio broadcast, with DVDs and USBs. You know, in North Korea, more and more there are black markets where people are meeting and talking and organizing, and not organizing, but they're meeting and talking, and they're bartering and buying goods, whether that's food or products in these black markets. But they're getting information, and so that is where people are going to learn. But organizing and rising up against the government is going to be very difficult. If the government collapses, then maybe the people in North Korea can kind of organize and coalesce and decide what they want to do going forward. But there are a lot of other factors that come into play if a government collapses.
Now, what about outside interaction? You know, a little help from the U.S. or some of our allies to get the ball rolling, a little aid, find some, you know, militia groups that are out there and give them some equipment and information that they need to push them along. We know that's happened in other circumstances around the globe throughout history, and, you know, people that say it didn't happen, they got their heads buried in the sand. We know it has happened. So do you see something like that happening here to try to say, you know, let the government collapse upon itself? It hasn't happened, so now we'll give it a little push. Do you see something like that happening in North Korea?
Well, that's what I would argue for. I mean, but that is seen as an aggressive stance. And so if you try to do these covert operations and they're found out, then the fear is, like we talked about earlier, the fear is that North Korea would retaliate by firing missiles at Seoul, which is a scary scenario as well. And so I think there is concern and caution from our government right now to do these covert actions. But things like Radio Free Asia and Voice of America, our Congress should be funding those. They should be funding those at with much greater levels than what they are now, right? Those are easy things we can do. And then we should be trying to provide aid into North Korea and trying to get that aid to the right people. The problem is North Korea diverts it to the military and the elites. So, you know, for me, I would argue that pumping these radio broadcasts is the best thing we can do, and is the first thing we should start doing, is increasing the funding for places like Radio Free Asia, Voice of America, increasing funding and support for the North Korea defector radio stations and radio operations that are in South Korea, trying to pump information into North Korea.
All right, well, we're running out of time. I have a couple of questions left I definitely want to ask you before we wrap it up. You know, I read a story coming out of UK in one of their journals, and, I mean, it was just tragic. It's heartbreaking, and it shows children being ravaged to death on the streets by dogs and others buried alive in concentration camp-type scenes. And, I mean, how prevalent is that in the country? And other countrymen seeing that those are the conditions, you would think that that would be a spark to say, enough already. We have to end these, you know, crimes against humanity, and it's time to step up and try to change things.
Exactly. I mean, you actually had a country in Africa, I'm blanking on its name right now, but it had a country in Africa that withdrew diplomatic relations from North Korea after the UN Commission of Inquiry's Human Rights Report came out. And that's a positive sign. Countries saying, no, we're not going to deal with North Korea anymore because of their human rights record, and we're going to be a lot more stringent when we do deal with North Korea because of that human rights record.
Do you think the U.S. should really lead the way and say, apart from sanctions, we're a country that's premised on individual rights, human rights, protecting the abilities of the people to have free speech and everything else, freedom of religion, and opportunities to get better jobs, to eat, to have access to water and food, etc., that when we see these crimes against humanity going on there, isn't there something more that we can do, whether it's forcing the UN, other allies, even countries that usually aren't our allies, to step in and say, look what's going on here. We need to help the people and change things.
Yes, the United States is the best country and is the most important country to be pushing those arguments that you're making, that we, the United States, believe in individual freedoms. We believe in the freedom of religion and religious freedom, and we encourage other countries to constantly pressure North Korea to change on how it's dealing with its people. That is the most important thing we can do, is to remind people that these are not just American ideals, but these are universal ideals and universal values, and that North Korea needs to treat its people much, much better. We, have the thing the United States can do is continue to push for these reports and push for these stories about North Korean human rights to pressure North Korea to change. North Korea does respond at times to pressure, and so these actions and reports are ways to show North Korea that everyone cares about what's going on there and that they need to change. It's very, very important, and it's important for the United States to do that, because if we're not doing it, other countries won't do it. We need to be the ones.
No, we need to be the leaders. We got to set the example and lead the way. Now, one last question.
Definitely.
Let's get back to Dennis Rodman, because that's what most people see, because they watch entertainment-related news rather than trying to get real news. But I want to ask, why him to go there? Why was he asked to go there? Did he approach them? I always wanted to know how that even came about, that he was selected or picked or asked to go there, not once but twice. And what kind of message does that send? I mean, I'm sure to the people in North Korea, they look at it and say, wow, some big U.S. celebrities coming here. We really, the leader of our country must really be loved and be powerful because he got him here. I mean, how do they manipulate that within the press in their own country?
First, on Rodman's visit, Vice Media, which is a media organization, they have done some kind of undercover and investigative, or investigative type journalism in North Korea before, and they were trying to get back to North Korea. They had a great idea: basketball diplomacy. Kim Jong-un loves basketball. We can get access back into North Korea using basketball. They needed a big-time celebrity. Rumors is that they went after Michael Jordan, and Jordan turned him down. And Rodman said yes. I think Dennis Rodman said yes because he needed the money and because he wanted attention. So the initial visit was through Vice Media, helping that process through by getting Dennis Rodman and then getting 3 players from the Harlem Globetrotters. Once Rodman got there, once he got access to Kim Jong-un, the next trip was a lot of Rodman and a lot of his team putting that together, along with funding help from Paddy Power, an Irish gambling site. So that is how Rodman got to North Korea. You're right. As far as how the North Koreans spun it, they spun it as look at this famous basketball player who loves our leader, and these basketball players come over for our leader's birthday, and they are clapping for him and bowing to him on his birthday, so we must be a powerful country. That is how that visit was spun.
I mean, it was surreal. Rodman started singing happy birthday to him. I was having flashbacks, and Marilyn Monroe was singing to JFK, and I was like, am I really watching this? That he's serenading happy birthday to him? It almost took on a Saturday Night Live spin, like it was a skit that was going on, but it was real life, and I couldn't believe I was watching it. And the whole thing just sent such a bad tone to me. I couldn't watch it after a couple of minutes.
No, and you could see and you could see the other players watching it too, just in fear because they knew that they were going to get criticized for this visit. They knew that this visit was not going well, and as much as they wanted to try and, those other players I think really did want to try and help and want to try to do basketball diplomacy and do basketball camps. And they were told they were going to do some camps for some kids. I don't think that happened. So you could really see the disappointment and just shame really on their face.
Well, I think it was all good
intentions.
intentions. I think Dennis is an interesting personality himself. I don't think he had anything but good intentions going there, but you could have good intentions and be a little naive and be manipulated along the way. And I'm sure Dennis had money motives for going. I'm going to get him on the show to talk about that hopefully in the near future, to find out a lot of the behind-the-scenes stuff for that. And if I do, I'm going to welcome you back, my friend, so you can be part of that conversation, because I'm sure you would have some very specific questions to ask him. Well, with that said, we're out of time. Before we go, I'd just like you, Nicholas, to please tell us what sites or places people can go to get more information, either about you or the organization you work for, on these great topics, if they want additional information.
Sure. The best place is our website, which is www.keia.org. So the Korea Economic Institute of America, and that's our website, www.keia.org. That's the best place for our stuff. I recommend those 3 books as well: Escape from Camp 14 by Blaine Harden, Nothing to Envy by Barbara Demick, and Aquariums of Pyongyang by Kang Chol Hwan. Those are 3 great books about North Korea and about North Korean defectors that I think your audience would love to read about.
Well, I appreciate your time. It was a riveting session. I definitely got to get you back. Everybody, I want to thank once again our great guest, Nicholas Hamisevicz. Thank you so much, Nicholas.
Thanks, Adam. I appreciate it.
Look forward to having you back.
Definitely.
Take care. My next guest on the Adam Thompson Show, you know him if you watch The Sopranos, then you know who he is. He was one of the best characters on that show. If you don't know The Sopranos, I don't know where you've been. You've probably been hiding under a rock for a long time. But we have the great Vito from The Sopranos, none other than the one and only Joe Ganascoli. How you doing, buddy?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing good. Hey, listen, it's always nice to speak to a fellow Brooklynite, you know?
Oh, you're a Brooklyn guy, huh?
Hey, I'm born and raised East Flatbush and then spent all my teen years over in Bensonhurst. So, you know, I'm a neighborhood guy.
Excellent. Okay.
All right. So, you know, I love to read all the bios on all the guests that I have, because everybody knows you from The Sopranos, obviously, because you had one of the best character arcs on the show and storylines. And I read this, and it interests me. You started out cooking. You have a really good skill in cooking, and actually had a store called Soup as Art in Brooklyn. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I was a chef before an actor. That's how I got started in acting. Sort of a long story with that, but I used to have a restaurant called Soup as Art. It was like my cooking background is French and very tablecloth restaurants, but then my last restaurant I had was a knock-around sort of soup restaurant with wraps and salads and smoothies.
Because I find that fascinating that there's so many, you know, you find so many people have so many different talents and different things. And I read this and I was like, you might have been the original soup Nazi, like on Seinfeld. Soup is Art. This is a great name for a place.
Yeah, I was the soup fascist.
Right, you got it going. There you go. It works out perfect that way. So I read this. How did it all come about with getting on The Sopranos?
Well, it's sort of like a long story, but I basically auditioned for it, and they made me one scene in the first season, a different character, and then they brought me back as Vito.
Right. I know that you played, I think it was someone who worked at a bakery or somewhere, and just in one scene, and they must have liked what they saw, and then they brought you back.
Yeah. I mean, I was pretty lucky. I think I'm the only character to do that. And there was that bakery scene where I get thrown out of the bakery by Christopher, and he wound up shooting the kid behind the counter in the foot.
Right. Now, let me ask you. You have another distinction, not just appearing and then coming back as a different character, but it's my understanding that the whole story arc with Vito, when they go into the whole gay subplot and all that, that was actually your idea from reading about different mafia cases that were going on, and you actually took that to to Chase, and he actually liked it, and he said, you know what, we're going to use that.
Well, it was real life, and it was about a bad crew in Brooklyn that had someone in the crew was gay, and I thought it would be interesting and a way to get me, more acting time.
And how did you approach him about that? Because I know he was very strict on his storylines. He was very strict about even ad-libs to go outside the script a lot of the times. That was his, demeanor and his reputation. So how did you, go to approach him doing this?
Well, I didn't have the coconuts to approach him, but I approached one of the writers, and I took her on the side and said, listen, I'm reading a book. It's very interesting about a gay character, and I'd be willing to do it if, it makes sense. And they thought about it, and 2 seasons later, they brought it in.
Yeah, well, that was a great story arc. In terms of watching the show, no one saw that coming, and I mean, you did an excellent job, man. I mean, that was just one of the good storylines.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
And true to life, which they say reality and fiction. The lines between them, it's always best when it's based on true life. So now,
right,
it had to be devastating because when James Gandolfini passed, he was such a beloved guy. You never really heard a bad thing about him. What was it like when you heard his passing?
Well, it was, devastating. Life is very fragile. He was a guy that was, in his prime and everything to live for, and kids and a baby daughter, and, it's just like that, he was gone. So it's something I think about all the time. Everyone brings it up every time I meet someone.
Yeah, I mean, it's
very sad.
Right, I mean, and when you look at him, he had so much going on, just had a new movie coming out, and it really, like you said, it makes you think about how frail life is, and you could be here today, gone tomorrow, and it really makes you reflect on the good things in life and the important things in life, because you don't know when that's going to end.
Right, it's so true.
Well, another thing that a lot of people ask about, I like to know what the characters talk about this. I had Frank Vincent on the show, and we talked about a bunch of stuff relating to the show. How did you think the last episode was? Do you think the finale was fitting for the show, or there's so much criticism one way or the other? It was genius the way he did it. Other people wanted a more definitive ending. Does Tony get killed? What happens? People like to really know and see. What were your thoughts on the ending?
I love the ending. I thought that any way he would have won would have disappointed somebody. I think he gets busted, he flips, he gets killed. So I think the window just closed, or the door just closed, and life went on, and that was it. We peeked into his life for 6 years, or 8 years, whatever it was, and that was it.
Well, I think it's genius in the regards that it let your imagination really have to answer questions, but it also left open the door for a film. And I think a lot of people were thinking that there's going to be some big film, maybe putting some finality to it in the future. But now with James passing, I don't know what the likelihood of that is ever happening.
I don't think there would ever been a film, and certainly not now. I think he had to say everything he had to say in 86 hours of, 1-hour shows. So I don't think there was been much more he could have done.
Now, given the popularity of The Sopranos, when it was on the air, there was no show more talked about. Do you think that they would ever try to create some type of, you take some other central characters from it and go another direction with it, or cover another family somewhere else and try to revisit that whole genre all over again?
Well, they did it with Steve Van Zandt. He's got a show on now called Lilyhammer on Netflix. They've tried other mob shows, whether it be Mob City or Magic City or
Broadway Empire.
But nothing really. Boardwalk Empire, and then that's a well-written show, well constructed. And there's been other fans of shows. I'm fans of other great shows that not necessarily mob, but Breaking Bad, Homeland I love, Mad Men I love. So there's a lot of great shows out there, and people tell me Sons of Anarchy. But no one talks about it around the water cooler the next day. I mean, that's why we're, I guess we're still the best.
That's why, hey, listen, when you talk about, Godfather or Mafia-type movies, it's The Godfather. When you talk about the mob-related shows, it's always Sopranos. So you guys set the bar. Every show that ever comes out on TV now that's mob-related is always compared, how does it rank with The Sopranos? So you guys are the barometer that everything's checked about. Now, I always wondered, so many of the cast just seem like natural fits for all of this. So how much of this really had involved playing someone outside of your own persona, your own character? Because, I mean, you're a Brooklyn guy. That's why I led off with that. I'm a Brooklyn guy. You know, when I watch The Sopranos, I see lots of people I knew growing up in The Sopranos. You know what I'm saying? So how much of the cast, including yourself, was it really acting chops added on to the fact that, you know, your own personality? How much of that was in you to begin with, and how much was brought in from the outside?
A lot of us grew up around those guys. I mean, I'm from Brooklyn, and, you know, we know the way they will talk and act and how they eat and so on. But any kind of personal things going on in your life was sort of incorporated. I had bad hips that had to be replaced. You know, I walked with a limp. They incorporated that. I was going through a weight loss. They incorporated that. But, you know, the natural, you know, way that they act and talked and ate is all, you know, came organically, I guess.
Right. Well, the way that all the characters were played in that show were excellent. You obviously included in all of that. How did it feel when you heard that the show was coming to an end?
Well, at that point, I didn't care, man. I was dead, you know, and I lasted 41 episodes, you know, so.
Well, that's a great run.
Go on years and years. Yeah, no, it was a great run for me.
So of all the parts that you played, what did you find to be the most difficult over the years?
Oh, the one on the show. You know, he played a gay guy. I'm from Brooklyn, so, you know, it's anything but what I'm like, you know?
Right. That's why I thought that was such a brave thing. When I found out that you actually took that idea to the show, I was like, wow, it's not just a great idea, but, you know, throwing yourself into that role is really, you know, putting yourself out there, and it's, you know, I just thought it was great. Now, what are you working on right now? Anything new going on? What should we look for?
I got a movie out now called Rob the Mob, true story, about a couple in the 90s that were knocking off social clubs. It's with Michael Pitt from Boardwalk Empire and Andy Garcia and Ray Romano, me, Burt Young, Michael Rispoli. I played Jackie Sr. So that's, I think it's going to go wide in another week or two. It's getting very good reviews. It's playing in New York. And I created a product that's licensed by the NFL.
What? Tell us about that.
It's bottle skin. It goes over a 5-gallon water bottle cover. Very proud about that. It's going to be going in Home Depot, and Nestle Waters is going to carry it, and DS Services.
What is it exactly? What is it?
It's a skin. It's a skin. If you go on my Twitter page at Joe Ganescoli, you could see it. On my Facebook page, it's called The Bottle Skins. It's for baseball, college football, NFL, NHL.
Oh, so you could get your team that you like.
I've been working on that for a year.
You could just, like, if I'm a Yankee fan, I could buy the skin and put it over the bottle?
Yeah, 5-gallon in small bottle. We're not doing baseball yet. We're going out with NFL first.
Oh, that's great.
That's our best license. Yeah, so I'm happy about that.
Well, you're a jack of all trades. You're keeping it busy. You're keeping it busy. You're doing skins, you're cooking, and you're still doing the films, man. Hey, listen, I got to thank you for coming on. I know you're busy. I don't want to tie you up any further, but it's been a pleasure having you on. Everybody, this was the one and only Joe Ganescoli. You know him from The Sopranos. He's great. Go buy some of his skins and support his work. He always does great stuff. Thanks for coming on, Joe.
You got it, pal. Thank you. A pleasure.
Hey, give my best back to all the boys back in Brooklyn.
All right, man. We'll do.
Take care, buddy.
See ya.
Great set, man. Thanks a lot, man. I greatly appreciate it. That's all the time we have, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to another edition of the Adam Thompson Show. Remember, always visit us at our website, www.adamthompsonlaw.com. While you're there, visit our Facebook page and our Twitter account and our YouTube channel. Post your comments and your opinions. Tell us how you like the shows and what topics you'd like to hear us discuss. Another thank you to our two guests tonight, Joe Ganescoli from The Sopranos and North Korean expert Nicholas Hamisevicz. Thanks for coming on. Next week, very big show on 9/11. We have Richard Gage from Architect and Engineers for 9/11 Truth discussing whether what we know about 9/11 is actually true or a cover-up. Till next time, remember, always think outside the box.